Before we get started, we just want to ask everyone to please silence your cell phones. And we also want to thank the guys back at Bungie, all of them who helped put this together. So my name's Joe Spataro. I'm a senior designer at Bungie. On Reach, I was a technical designer in animation. That was a new role, and what I was primarily responsible for was tying together all of the animations in the game engine.
My name is Tam Armstrong. I'm an engineer at Bungie, and on Reach, I was one of the programmers responsible for implementing the features we're going to talk about today. So there's some things we know about the content that we're trying to achieve these ideas. First, feet travel over a flat ground plane in content, generally speaking. The feet in the content are following a single path that's pretty well determined by the content. The reality is that the world is not a flat ground plane ever, and that the character does never actually move in a straight line. So what we needed was a way to warp the feet so that they would look like they were doing the right thing in real time. If you look at this loop cycle from an actual shipping animation in Halo Reach, we've traced out the path the foot takes. So what I'm trying to say with the foot fitting is that if you bend this path, you can fit the path against the terrain and into the turns the characters are making. You don't have to mess with the whole animation. If you bend the foot path and then IK the feet continuously to that path, you can fit it up slopes, and furthermore, you can fit it into the turns you're making. So watch the Spartan as he goes over the edge and walks down the hill. The feet remain relatively stable and feel very grounded. As the Spartan begins to turn, you'll notice the feet actually turn into the arc the character is making while fitting against the slope. The Spartan always looks connected.
The pose also didn't determine the parameter value, and what I mean by that is that when the animators made a pose, it wasn't connected to the values in the game engine in any way specifically. Like, if the animator aims the gun over here, outside in game data is where they would specify, hey, frame 6 is, the guy aiming over here. It wasn't the pose itself that knows that.
And the important part about that is that if they got one of the poses in the wrong place, in the wrong frame in the content, they could put an up pose in the slot that was supposed to be the left pose, and then it would just break.
And one problem with this is that it's really difficult to get a character to move around the frame of the warthog without clipping through it.
Reason being is you don't have a lot of detail when you're confined to a rigid structure like that and you'd like to add more samples around the frame, you just can't without making the entire blend selection more dense.
So here's an example of the Spartan sitting in a warthog, and he's aiming all the way to the right.
Where the green grid represents the different samples triangulated.
Yeah. And here's a sample of him aiming a little bit more to the left. And now one where he's aiming straight up. So we take all three of those poses and we're going to blend them together. But how? If the Spartan aims somewhere in the middle of any of those three poses, we use each of the three poses to generate a weight for each one. We blend them all together and then we add that on top of the base animation. So if he aims further towards the top, then it's going to be more of that pose. And somewhere in the middle, it's going to be a little bit of a blend of all three. It looks like this. So here, we've added a lot more samples around the frame of the warthog, which lets him, aim around that frame without passing the gun through it. Since the system was data-driven, we could apply these poses to anything. We could apply it to vehicles, we could apply it to characters. So most everything in the game that you see kind of moving around was using pose blends.
How we synchronized animations. Next piece of technology. First, we want to describe what exactly we're talking about here. We want to synchronize animations across characters. We want to synchronize them with the environment. And we want it to work with any number of participants. If there are two Spartans interviewing a civilian next to a crate who's part of the animation, all of those objects are in the synced animation. We use this for our assassinations and our in-game story moments. This system was completely new to Reach. We don't have an analog to compare it with from prior games, but we can point out some of the challenges that we had. Aligning sync actions in the sandbox, which is to say live during gameplay, is very difficult. One of the principles we came up with is that if you have an abrupt or violent start, you can mask the interpolation of the characters into position pretty effectively. This was employed in the assassination animations where a character would dash in, strike the victim, and during that chaos we could line everything up, and then the resulting animations would play in sync after that. For the story moments, we learned very clearly that reaching a good starting point in a good pose specifically is difficult. You need to know things like the foot contact and the transition length, and this needs to be informing your pathfinding system so that you can arrive in the right place at the right time and start your animations.
May God help us all.
Here's some assassinations.
Ticket, like milestones, that sort of force.
There was actually a range of assassination samples behind every character.
We made a bunch
Your
of
angle of
changes
entry determined which piece of content would play so that we could have the least amount of interpolation and fix-up possible.
Like this thing.